run a few announcements here real quick. One is, don't forget that you can, if so inclined, submit Grant Wood related poetry, ekphrastic poetry to the Iowa Poetry Association this year, and get yourself in the running for publication in the annual Lyrical Iowa, and also possibly place or get honorable mention in the Grant Wood Poetry Award. First time they're doing that this year. If you are not from Iowa, then what we'll be doing in the Chronicle this year is having some editor's choice writing that Dawn and I will work on together for this edition. Another thing that's happening is, I don't want you to forget that last week we heard from Carrie Nicely of the American Gothic House in Eldon, and this Saturday there's going to be a break in the weather. It's supposed to get in the 40s down there, and they're throwing a party for Grant Wood's birthday down there and hosting a collector from Washington, Iowa, who has a couple new Grant Wood pieces to reveal to folks and show some of his collection down there. And so several of us are going down there, and she said, just call them, Google American Gothic House, get the phone number or sign up. I would say call them at this point, because I think their first session at 10 in the morning is full. But if you wanted to venture down there, they would do a second session as well. So that's that. And next up, we'll have Joe Coffey. He will be zooming in from Chicago, formerly of Cedar Rapids, formerly of other places, with his mad presentation skills to regale us with tales of what city life was like in the era of Grant Wood. And so I think it just so charms me, just the engagement we have among the presenters and how much they know and how much we can learn from them all. And not least of which is our presenter tonight, Steve Hankin. So we'll get to you soon, Steve. First, we're going to just get people thinking in terms of inspiration on the literary. Oh, good. We have more than one poem. Okay, Mike, so we'll have Lynn and let's see here.
I had it on a different computer, so I had to pull it up here on the side. So
okay, good enough. We've got 3 people queued up to read, so I'm not going to read. So we'll have Lynn and Willinga, and then we'll have Mike Wilson, and then we'll have Angela Dew. All have something to share with us.
good.
So excited. So about that. So I think I will just, and after that, we'll think about writing ourselves a limerick or two together.
Okay.
Group limericks. Okay. All right, Lynn. Feel free to give us any context you'd like, Lynn, about this, or yourself, or the poem, or all the above.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks for letting me read. My poem is autobiographical, and it's called American Gothic Survivor, and I'm going to try to share the screen.
Oh.
Is that working?
And I've
never done that before, so I don't know.
Well, whatever it is that you want to share has to be up on your screen first.
Okay, it is.
Oh, here it comes. Yay.
Okay.
Oh, very good.
You can see my unflattering photograph selfie. Okay. American Gothic Survivor. I might sour milk with such an expression as I grip pitchfork and offer confession. Been married to farmer nearly 40 years, had my fair share of blood, sweat, and tears. Chores in the morning, chores at night, weeds, taxes, and bulls can cause a fright. We raised 5 sons, corn, cattle, soybeans, survived through Iowa's weather extremes. I pose alone here, but my husband calls, must finish the harvest before snow falls. Of course I love farming, I'm no liar, but farmers don't smile until they retire.
Good.
Oh, Lynn, that is so charming. Thank
Glad
you
you
so
liked it.
much for that.
Nice.
Yes. I see you have that humorous category down. Oh my. Did you have anything else you'd like? Okay, Lynn's done. Okay. Well, next up, we've got Mike.
Oh, okay. I'm going to have to look off to the side while I read this, but forgive me for that. I don't have it on Zoom here, but I hope you can all hear me okay. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, good. It's titled An Iowa Masterpiece. And the first side of the contrapuntal goes, he wrought works in silver, branching to other disciplines, learned impressionist styles, taught middle and high schools, painted murals on commission. He was always striving towards the next amazing creation. And then the other side, found objects and made collages, woodworking and painting took hold, emulated European masters, studied in Paris and Munich, have put on his own exhibitions, another grand project always going, something in the pipeline, only to be known and defined by a man, woman, pitchfork, and window. I would be happy to have done half as much as Grant would, and who wouldn't? Now I could combine the two. Do you want me to read the combined also, or?
Sure, of course.
Okay. He wrought works in silver, found objects and made collages, branching to other disciplines, woodworking and painting took hold, learned impressionist styles, emulated European masters, taught middle and high schools, studied in Paris and Munich, painted murals on commission, put on his own exhibitions. He was always striving towards another grand project, always going, the next amazing creation, something in the pipeline, only to be known and defined by a man, woman, pitchfork, and window. I would be happy to have done half as much as Grant would, and who wouldn't? So that's combined. That's on my poetry blog, but I did that after you were reading the contrapuntals. I just had to try one, so.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I'm glad to see there was a brave soul, because that's not the easiest lift.
It's not very easy, and I think what I have could be worked on. I mean, I'm sure I could enhance what I've got there, but it's a start. It's a starting point, so.
Thanks for sharing. Loved it very much. That form is so
Great.
fun. And you're free to tweak away all you want on it. So
Yeah, you can do that on your own blog, so.
yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Well-
Thank you for letting me read it.
Oh, thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to have you.
Mhm.
Oh, so now we have Angela. Angela Dew has one for us.
Hi, everyone. I haven't been able to make it until now. I had been part of it last year. Here's one I had written last year that I don't think I had read. It's a variety of just different inspiration. It's called Dancing the Hills. The road curves among fields, dotted with delicious lollipop trees. Grandmother finds her voice, remembers corn stalks from fairy tales, her papa, ballet slippers, and Sunday chicken dinners. Smiling eyes, now fortified between wrinkles, dance quickly from childhood to motherhood and still waltzes forward. Remembers messy closets, newborn toes, and portraits with sisters. Soft hands now take mine and show me how to dance the hills. That's it.
Nice, wonderful imagery, Angela. Dancing the hills. It's always fun when something is so visually or some sort of sense is evoked so strongly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And And Mike did put his blog link in the chat in case you all want to pop in on that. So that's fun. So let's I want to infuse a little bit of energy here. I'm going to just do this old school. I'm going to scribble, and I want to hear some lines for some limericks. It is an easy form. I will read one. A limerick, it's just a standard form, 5 lines, first, second, fifth rhyming. We all kind of know the rhythm. I'll give an example here that's from a classic limerick, which of course started in, the form appeared in England in the early years of the 18th century. They said, popularized, and let me see if there's anything else. The form is essentially transgressive. Violations of taboos are a part of its function. I think that's pretty funny, because I think of it as so kind of benign, you know. And one thing I would like to say is I like to think that this forum has space for every vibe from pub to parlor. So, you know, there's just, we just rural, city, pub, parlor. I don't know what would have been taboo in the 1930s, but here's one that's a classic. There was a young rustic named Mallory who drew but a very small salary. When he went to the show, his purse made him go to a seat in the uppermost gallery. So there you go. You got classic, social strata in early limericks there. So what do we got? What do we got for Grant was okay, I'll open the chat. Grant was a man from Stone City. Thank you, Carla. Who's got the next line?
Oh.
Grant was a man from Stone City. Many knew him as supremely witty.
Okay.
Feel free to unmute whoever, because I can't hear you.
You put some in the chat, Elaine, or there's some in the chat.
There, they just showed up. Thank you, Deb. His impressions.
Oops.
An Iowa place so pretty. Okay, so Grant was a man from Stone City, and Iowa place so pretty. His impressionist paintings were pretty. So let's paint now with words. His wife was somewhat of a biddy. Was she? He painted trees and hills and roads. A poem about birds.
Hey, Elaine,
Let's see.
Yeah.
do we get bonus points if we can do something clever and clean with Nantucket?
I think you should. Absolutely. Oh goodness. Was that Nancy?
That was Julie.
Julie. Oh, Julie. Yes. Consider us in the pub right now.
Okay.
Yes. So I see where you're going. I'm gonna have to take screenshots here. I'm gonna capture some.
Something.
You guys, there we go. I was gonna say I did something awkward there. Okay. Okay, he milked cows with a bucket.
Oh.
That's for Nantucket.
Oh,
Yes.
that's fun. That pitchfork painting was most pithy. Oh, I like that. That's good. Then he moved to the city. Birds. So painting with words, a poem about birds. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. There we go. There we go.
Yeah.
And oh, look at that. Okay. So what I'll do while Steve is presenting, because I'm privy to what he's going to say, I will I'll put some of these together and report back to you.
Okay.
Okay, so if you have anything else to put in there, put it in the chat. But otherwise, I don't want to take any attention away from Steve because what he's saying, you guys are going to really find interesting. So Steve Hankin, it's just been a pleasure to get to know him and all his broad and wide knowledge about all things rural. He's very humble and very candid about what he thinks and where he stands on his point of view, and that's always nice to hear. But I think he's a little bit modest sometimes because he really does a lot of due diligence in everything that he does. And I appreciate that so much. He's got the extensive experience working with the state archaeologists, Iowa Barn Foundation. He's doing things with creameries right now. He's got a cousin who is the subject of one of Grant Wood's paintings, which we like to dangle that in front of people now and then, because we are in Grant Wood country. And there are people who knew people, and some of those people were Grant Wood or people that were his subjects. So that's wonderful. So I'm going to stop blabbering so that you can regale us, Steve.
Well, to start off with, my wife Sharon should be thanked for how I deconstructed this from a lecture to something a little more audience friendly. As is often said, behind every great man is a great woman. I'm not so sure of my greatness, but if anything helps me out, it's the constructive criticism and editing I get from her. We as aficionados of Grant Wood know him as an Iowa kinsman who painted and printed Iowa in a very favorable way. There are no weeds in Wood World. When it comes to the landscape, everything is purest perfection. Next slide. The corn's in straight rows like soldiers on parade. You can line it up in every direction. The same goes for the shocks of oats and the corn. Even the hills and the trees have symmetry not found in the natural world. The reality of even attempting to plant corn with a 2-row corn planter using a wire to create this kind of straight rows on hills is next to impossible. It works fine on relatively flat ground, but steep hills, you can forget it. The purpose was to be able to cultivate corn in several directions, so a wire with knots in it was used to trip the planter mechanically to make the uniformity possible. Next slide. There's no satellites or GPS. This was a process worked out with a roll of wire on steep hills. It just didn't happen. As you can see, the rows are diagonal, even though they're planted the other direction. So you could cultivate in 2 different directions. All right, next slide. I'm reminded of the days of the Prairie Home Companion and Garrison Keillor's closing remarks for every program. A place where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average. Truly, this is what Grant Wood was selling, a recollection of the past we all hold near and dear, but without the warts and hiccups we all know happened and were a large part of the day-to-day life. The outhouse without the smell sort of world. Next picture.
Yeah.
There are parts of this recollection that many of us have lost sight of simply because we're so far removed from the farm. Those who know about such things are aging fast like me. And soon even our recall will be gone. Dinners with thrashers, which is pictured here, is a prime example of just one of those things that speaks to the best parts of a time that is simply being swept away. Although it is being portrayed without the dirt and grime that accompanied these operations. It is interesting that every person dining at that extended table appears to be in neat and clean set of overhauls. No one could look that good by midday thrashing. Next picture. Farming for centuries has been a communal operation. You worked together to accomplish what needed to be done. Farming was always an occupation where you shared the workload with others, about 80% of the time. Extended families worked along with neighbors together to get the community's work accomplished. As you can see, these three guys here would be like midday thrashers, and they're still pretty clean because their neckerchiefs aren't even soiled, and you don't see a whole lot of sweat in their clothing. My father's favorite place thrashing was on the top of the straw pile, because every farmer that knew anybody that had to be up on that straw pile would get them a pint of whiskey to go with it to wash down all the dirt. So now next photograph, please. You hayed together. Next photo. You thrashed together. Next photo. You picked corn. Next photo. And filled silo together. You shocked oats. Next photo. Vaccinated livestock, dehorned cattle, butchered, sawed wood, cut pigs, hauled manure on occasion. All of this was a community project. When disaster hit, as often did on the farm, neighbors pulled together to bring in the crops, plant the corn, put up and do what they could for suffering, a loss, or caring for spouse or loved one. Next picture. Grant Wood's nostalgia was ever present in his work, and many ascribe his choice to advice his boyfriend J. Sigmund gave, paint what you know. I can well believe Wood took place, but looking at the subject matter, it becomes clear Wood's interpretation was when he was a kid on the farm, not so much as a recorder of events in farming practice in the time the work was being painted. We find horses in many works, but no tractors. Even then, horses are forever plowing and little else. Next graph. Again, could it be that the life for Grant and his age may have limited his like much of the farm? Next picture. Certainly the tractor was present throughout Iowa, along with horses into the 40s and 50s. Gas and kerosene tractors had been available as early as 1906. Horses peaked in the 1920s and gradually off to around 5 million in the nation in the 1950s. When you compare the 1920s and when Wood was much of his painting, it gives a more exacting picture. The number of horses in Iowa fell by 214,613. These are only those capable of work, not foals or horses too young to work. During the same period, the number of trucks rose by 23,759 and tractors by 40,988. The automobile, surprisingly, rose by almost 3,000. These are strong trends that war only contributed to. It is interesting to see the marketing going on at the time. Automobiles. The next picture, please. This is some of the workings to find the farm. So this is showing a Model T grinding corn. Next picture. And then you have the forever famous Model T trying to plow two furrows, and I doubt that ever happened. Although as gas and oil entered the picture, many things began to change on the farm. Next picture. Although not a life of leisure, things were changing for everyone on the farm. Next picture. This is a sawmill. Next picture. And this is a gas engine pumping on a pump for pumping water. The less handwork that needed to be done, the more time for other things. Even before we entered World War I, there was an indications farming was going to be essential war industry to provide food for the Allies and eventually our own Army and Navy. Demand would be high and prices would be as well. It didn't take much prompting to switch from a horse to a tractor for many reasons. So long as you had fuel, the tractor would be working. Horses eventually would tire. Even the man behind the plow in 8 miles. Next page. Tractor, there's a change in the roads. Now you could control the width the horse, and the tractor, that space got narrower bicycle front ends. Next picture. So you can see how narrow the front, so that the road horn got closer together. You needed less pasture, and this gave you more corn ground and more production. Unfortunately, with the war ending rather suddenly in 1918, the Depression hit the farm almost immediately. Prices plummeted for farm products as fast as the ink dried on the armistice. Again, the photos that were generated by the WPA. Next picture. Those that were generated by the WP and other work projects give a much more desperate picture of Iowa than what Woods painted. Was one way to put the genie back in the bottle. Was he creating a Disney-esque world of Ozzie and Harriet style farm where the grass is always green and the overalls are immaculate, the feet is clean? Next photo. The speed of progress in the farm seemed to be paced and spread out at the time. Even though his scenes on the farm were somewhat outdated, they were still, with the Depression showing the speed of progress, the pace of bigger, better, faster, and fewer continued. Plows got wider, colders, and more horses were added until it's difficult to handle. Next picture. Plows quickly went from walking plows to sulky plows, where you rode instead of walked, none of which you see in the wood depictions of farm life. Next picture. Only 4 horses, but 2 bottoms, and you're sitting instead of standing all the way around the field. With the number and widths of plowshares continued to increase. Assuming job that had a one demand a field for a day plowing could easily finish in a few days. As I age, I can feel for something more comfortable, something to stand, have to relearn every few months. My grandfather was born in the year Custer made stand, and he died in 1864. I marvel over the things he lived to see in his life. I can also see the fear of the future depicted in Wood's Pathos Road. Slow, steady Model A being overtaken by the long and speedy sedan that likely will take both cars out by that oncoming truck, seconds away. Next picture. Nope. $28.
Mhm.
This is Death on the Ridge Road. Clouds, the only real sign of zig and zag with the thing following that straight and narrow woods path paintings. They are very conform to the way they're supposed to be, even if in reality they aren't real. That age-old conservative curtain people hid behind only existed on the margins. Wood grew up in the middle of a curious world made up of adventurous people who read newspapers and magazines, not only for enjoying the 1800s have been filled with editors of farm publications whose formal education was largely from seminary schools. They are the people who put farming on the pedestal of righteousness and cleanliness. Farmers were less inclined to be disreputable since work kept them out of the devil's playground. With tractors, radios, electricity, and record players, farming as an occupation of goodness was headed straight to hell. Wood was not destined to see what eventually happened simply because of his early death. It is fortunate he had the opportunity to express himself, painting what he knew and leaving us that legacy. He was not immune to the political situation of the times, but simply turned on his 10-year-old mind and used it for a reference point. Most of the time, he did what he could to keep the wolf from the door. Nothing got any crazier than Death on the Ridge Road, but I wonder if he wasn't saying a whole lot more about a place he loved and once understood. Okay, this was the thumbnail of a whole ton of stuff. And what makes this forum fun is the discussion that has been missing of late. I would guess that in near every photo of farmers doing something, there's nuances that are completely missed by people who have no idea what they are seeing or simply it isn't apparent. Next picture. For example, there are tractors that have no seats. Some farmers felt it wasn't manly to sit down. They had always stood up to cultivate corn, plow, and for the most part, drive horses, unless it was a wagon, and even then, some stood up. I can't imagine what those farmers would think of if they saw farming today. So let's get on with the better part of this forum, and thanks for listening. There you go.
Steve, thank you. Those pictures were just so great and very evocative in and of themselves.
I had about 50, but I cut it back. I thought I could get this going forever and ever and ever, but that wasn't going to do us a lot of good. So,
Well, I think folks need to choose a rabbit hole and go down it.
that's true.
Of
late, some of the things that have been going of late on the farm, we miss out on a whole lot of stuff that happened in the 20s and 30s when Wood was alive and well, that nobody seems to know about or care about. Things are like the farmers' rebellions that were happening in North Dakota and Minnesota and even in Iowa, where the governor had to turn out the National Guard with machine guns to protect the judges out in Western Iowa from being hung for foreclosing on farmers. But there was lots of interesting things happening and that would have sparked a lot of interest even today. North Dakota got started early in the 20s, and they opened up by taking over the state house. They started the Bank of North Dakota, which still exists today. It's the only true state bank in the entire country. It's owned and operated by the state of North Dakota. And so they run all their bonds through that bank. So they don't have to pay somebody else to sell their bonds. They sell their own. They handle all of their school loans through the Bank of North Dakota. And the reason they did that was because at the time, all the money was coming from the millers of Minnesota and the insurance companies, and everybody was getting foreclosed on all the time. They did a whole lot of changing in short order because the farmers couldn't spend time in the legislature. So a man organized the farmers and said, can you take two weeks off? And they said, yes. He says, okay, if you'll run, we'll get this all taken care of in 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks' time, they fixed the freight rates on the railroads. They created storage for grain. They created the Bank of North Dakota, and then they all went home. Done. And that's something that we probably need to do again. And with the Republicans that we've got in the Iowa State House, that's a damn good idea. So I'll shut up now.
See, who doesn't like a hanging story? I've circled back to that. It seems there's lots of like shenanigans all that have taken place anywhere you go.
Well, the
I'm not-
Democratic Party in Minnesota, up until just maybe 10 or 15 years ago, was not the Democratic Party. It was the Farm Labor Party of Minnesota. And that's from that period of time, all these years later.
And I put in, yeah, that's interesting. I put in the chat, everybody, feel free to unmute and just pop in. And with your comments or thoughts, if something like you have a family story or something from rural life that you think the group would find interesting, you know, feel free to pop right
Yes,
in.
if I might pop in, there was a writers group in Des Moines called the Des Moines Area Writers Network. And there was an older lady that used to be a member named Ruth Court. And she told us all stories that when she was a girl, they had horses on her farm. And she still remembered the names of their horses. And this is pre-World War II, but she's long passed away now. But I never grew up on a farm, but I heard a lot of fascinating stories like this over the years. So it's interesting. I never had to do that 12-hour-a-day work. So for me, it's just interesting. But probably for some who had to do all that farm work, it wouldn't be quite so interesting.
In the old days, you would have to do an inventory if the farmer died, and they had to inventory all of his livestock, everything. And if you look at those inventories, every cow has a name because they were part of the family.
Mm-hmm.
I can vouch for that. We named them all. The inventories weren't only done for when someone died, but they were part of the tax rolls. 1922, 2732, those tax rolls listed not only the property that the farmer owned, but all of the animals that they might have, 10 sheep, 2 horses, 4 cows, 6 pigs, whatever it was. But they were small numbers, not like we think of today, where a neighboring farm here has 300 cows. And they might have had 10. A big farm would have had 30. You had to be able to take care of them by yourself or with the help of your family.
Well, with that too, there was the business of if you're doing field work and your field work goes from dusk to dawn, when you get back in, you got cows to milk. That means you got to be milking in the dark, which was the reason why a lot of people only had 5 to 7 cows rather than have 30 cows and no lights. Have to be out there with a lantern to milk cows.
And Steve, when we were kind of talking at one point too, we were kind of reminding each other that really there was a blur between city and country life, because so much of the nearby city economy was dependent upon rural ag differently from now.
Yeah, that's that's a large problem we have with the small towns collapsing. The reason they're collapsing is they have no market. There's nobody buying from them because the farmers are getting larger, or farms are getting larger and larger and larger, and they're buying regionally, they're not buying locally. So consequently, the only thing that a farming community has left is a mechanic, somebody to work on your equipment. And in Monticello, we have 2 of those. Aside from that, we've got a Tyson's, which is a hardware store. And no, there's no businesses anymore. There's no clothing stores, no shoe stores. None of that exists anymore. And even restaurants and things like that have gone away because there's nobody buying them. There used to be 4 car dealers here, and there's not but 1 left, and he's just on his last legs. So,
Well, and I'm recalling that it was like in the 70s when Earl Butz was the ag secretary for at the federal level. If I'm remembering this quote accurately, well, first of all, he deregulated the farm markets. Secondly, he said, get big or go home to farmers. Am I?
get in, get big or get out.
Get big or get out. There we go. So, that's probably at the federal level, something that was pressuring from the top down, as well as any other pressures that may have been happening from the ground up. Am I thinking about that?
Yeah. Well, there's also the business of vertical integration and monopolies.
Right,
We all
right.
talk about not having monopolies or vertical integration because it's against the law, but then we make laws to make it legal.
Right.
So the packers couldn't own hogs. They couldn't run their hogs from piglets all the way to the market. They had to rely on somebody else to produce the hogs. Well, once these large hog houses got started, obviously there was going to be contracts to buy a whole hog house load of pigs, 5,000 pigs at a crack, easily. There wasn't any more filling in between because there were so doggone many hog houses. They knew exactly where the pigs were coming from, and they were paying the farmers to raise the pigs and providing the grain and the building and everything else. So they might as well just let them have it, because eventually what happened was hogs went to $8 a hundred, and you can't make a living on that. And in that particular point in time, everybody was barbecuing pigs to beat the band because they couldn't make any money on them anyway. So they might as well barbecue them and make them work for weddings and whatever else that you had going on.
Well, I have a question here in the chat to explain vertical integration. And as I understand it, it's like the same entity or company owning all the elements of production.
Yep.
When it used to be illegal, because if a company is allowed to own every aspect of an industry, it's like why the telephone companies got broken up at one point. You know, they get too big because the natural result of improperly regulated capitalism is going to be monopoly control. If you don't regulate it somehow, everything gets swallowed up by the next thing. So, and anyway, that's like a macroeconomics thing, but others could weigh in on that dynamic as well. But
Yeah, I
anyway,
think at one time Ma Bell made the phones and made the wire, and they made everything, and the federal government finally broke them up after many years of trying. So, and now they're looking at Amazon being too big, and so there was some
Right.
discussion about breaking up Amazon, but I don't know if that'll happen.
right. I mean,
Well, in this particular instance with the hogs, for sure, and maybe even the cattle, the hogs, I know when you put 5,000 hogs in a hog house, the reason that never was done in the old days is because of disease. You put that many hogs together, it's like packing in human beings into a small area and just feeding them. And they got no exercise, they get no light, they don't get anything. You have to give them antibiotics. And most of the antibiotics are through the feed. So 80% of the antibiotics that are fed to hogs ends up in the manure. 100% of the disease that comes from hogs comes from the soil. If you put all the antibiotics, 80% of the antibiotics back onto the soil, eventually whatever is in the soil, whatever bug that's in the soil that makes those diseases is going to end up like DDT, ineffective. And it is not only going to be ineffective for hogs, it's going to be ineffective for humans as well, because we're using the same stuff. So if
I
you can
wanna-
imagine that.
I want to
And
say
creating-
thank you for shedding some light on the situation of the American farmer. And that's absolutely right, what happened to the hog industry. We're a small family farm, and for many years we raised hogs, and some of our hogs were outdoors. You know, we did it the old fashioned way, small groups, but yeah, we couldn't fight the disease anymore either, because birds would spread it too, you know, from
Yeah.
the soil. So, and the markets were so poor that, yeah, it was too much work to lose money at. So now we're into cattle. Cattlemen are pretty independent, so they're fighting against this vertical integration, but that happened with the chicken industry too, the vertical integration. And so it's really hurt the small American family farm. We recently retired. Our second son is taking over our farm. And in order to make it work as a small operation, they're trying to market their beef online, you know, just to local customers as naturally grown. They try not to use antibiotics. They have them out on pasture for part of their lifetime. So, and it's working. It's really good beef. And so, but yeah, you have to find different ways to market it.
Yeah, and on restaurants now, you see on the menu, free range grass-fed beef with chemical free and all that. You see that on menus too. So that's
Yeah.
a good marketing tool. But
Yeah,
anyway.
it's a niche.
Mhm.
Well, that part of that problem is the fact that in the old days, farmers had to market their own stuff for a lot of it. They couldn't rely on the markets that we have today, where, you know, you take your grain in and they give you what they want to give you. That's the way it works. In the old days, they had to self-market. They made their own butter and they sold their own butter. They raised their own eggs and they marketed their own eggs. Everything was on them. But farmers have gotten to the point where they're lazy in terms of marketing. They just basically dump it on the market and walk away and wait for it to get high. Maybe if it doesn't, well, you got to do something with it. You can't keep it forever. You're going to have to sell it at some point. And they know that. And so consequently, they could a flick of the finger changes the market. It's not necessarily demand. And so if you market it, then you can do something with that, but you can't do that if you don't market your own.
Well, and the marketing game is so much more complex now I mean, I'd be hard pressed to describe any farmer I know as lazy. I think you were saying lazy in terms of the marketing piece, right?
Yeah.
How that works. So let me fly to the defense of the L word. But because just in terms of marketing, just what little bit I know from a relative who's kind of in that field a little bit, it used to take like 7 exposures of something before somebody might be inclined to respond to something they see marketing wise. Now that number, I think Joe Coffey might be able to speak to that more than that there's this increase of how many exposures somebody has to have to content before they'll respond to it now. It like a good old print ad in a newspaper used to be, well, if you marketed something 7 times and people was exposed to it 7 times, they might come or they might buy whatever it is you have. Now that number is in the 20s. I mean, just because there's just so many gateways to information. So I don't know.
Hmm.
And I hesitate to say those numbers too definitively, because probably by the time since I've had that conversation, something's probably changed. So, anyway, my point is I have great sympathy for anybody trying to market anything to anyone, no
Yeah.
matter what it is. It's tough.
There's work involved. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, because I'm envisioning in the old days where they'd have to load up a wagon with eggs and stuff and take it to a local market to sell it or something, or I don't know how they did things in the old days before pre-World War II, or they had a lot more local markets where they'd try to sell things, or
I can speak to the eggs and chickens, at least in the 40s and 50s. My dad was an egg man, a poultry man, and he would take his truck and go farm to farm within about a 20 to 30 mile radius and pick up cases of eggs and pay for them, usually a week later. If the farm wanted to get rid of their chickens, he'd come, call the chickens and haul them off. He did keep some diaries over the years, and I was looking at one today. He said that in the early 50s, when the prices were really good for eggs, he paid 49 cents a dozen to the farm wife for the eggs. The
Wow.
chickens themselves were worth about a dime. So a chicken was worth about a dozen eggs. So the farmers were debating on whether to keep their chickens another year because they were getting so much money off the eggs. Wouldn't we love 49 cents a dozen eggs right now?
yeah, I was gonna say that sounds like today.
But yeah,
My mother
Well-
used to sell eggs for $3 for $1, 3 dozen for $1.
well,
Mhm.
everything's relative, you know? It's like, look what, too bad we can't grow coffee beans, because you can get, you know, $5, $6 a cup for the right kind of coffee.
Oh, you gotta sell chicory. We got chicory that grows along the road, all those little blue flowers that you see out
Yeah,
there.
some of that coffee grows up in the mountains, so you might need a mountain to do that. It's a good thought.
Well, and most of the farms back in the 30s and 40s, they were more or less self-sustaining. They grew what they needed to eat, what they needed to feed, what they were going to eat, whether it was the chickens or the pigs or the hogs. And they sold what was left over. They didn't farm to earn money. They farmed to live, and anything extra then was sold. At least that was the experience I had growing up.
Mhm.
Hey, we have a question.
Interesting.
Thanks, Linda, that I was hoping you would have some thoughts, and that's great.
Mhm.
There is a question here. Does anybody, Steve, do you happen to know when Iowa's extension service began? Do you happen to know that off the top of your head?
That was probably in the 20s and 30s too.
Probably look
My
that
guess.
up. Coming out of Iowa State Extension. Yeah. And everything else was pretty much, was it? I'm not real. I mean, I have, you know, farmers congregated with each other in the surrounding towns of their farms. I mean, and a lot of knowledge and insights were passed around that way. You know, railroads coming through town, and
Your county fairs were places for a lot of that.
right.
And then they had agriculture societies in the counties as well.
Right.
In the wintertime, in winter times, they would have meetings, and same way with the creameries and the milk production. People would get together and talk about what works. Horticulture societies. It was just clubs, really. I mean, that's what it amounted to, and everybody show up. And they'd share whatever knowledge they had.
There was the Grange movement too. What was that? Great. The Grange movement was kind of a thing, wasn't it?
Well, Grange was political, but yeah,
Was it?
there was
Okay.
some places it was stronger than other places, but it was a lot more organized around the railroads and trying to get the freight rates fixed so that you
And
could
was
ship
there-
cattle to Chicago. and to Sioux City and places like that.
Well, weren't they responsible for getting rural postal service, the Grange movement?
I'm not sure of that, because that happened about turn of the century, about 1906, something like that. Rural free delivery.
Yeah,
There
because
was a
I mean,
real, there was a real clamor about that too. It was like, well, if you had a general store, it generally had whatever you needed. But the selection was a little short. So you got what they had until they didn't have it, and then maybe they got something different.
mhm.
And with rural free delivery, along comes Sears and Sawbuck. And they were marketing every doggone thing under the sun. And there were some real worried people at that time over how that was going to affect their markets, as far as the local guys with selling everything from overhauls to groceries. Because you could buy darn near anything from Sears and Roebuck and have it shipped to you by the mail.
I have a
Okay.
question, Steve.
Sure.
Do you know anything about the Farmers Union? I know my uncle in Southwest
Yeah.
Minnesota belonged to it at one time, and at one time they asked their members to dump their milk. I think it was in protest of the low
Yeah.
prices.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a kind of a goofy thing too. That comes in the 20s, and the business of marketing to local people, for instance, milk was being bottled locally and sold around town. You know, somebody had milk delivery services, even in towns the size of Monticello, which had less than 2,000 people, they had milk delivery. And so farmers are bringing milk into the bottlers in the towns, and their prices didn't go down. But the price that they were giving to the farmers was hitting the bottom. And they thought, well, the only way to stop that is to shut off the milk. And it kind of worked, but it was a little late doing that. And, you know, things just got worse with the Depression. Things just kept getting worse. From about 1918, when the first part of the Depression hit the farms, it didn't stop until almost the 1940s before the prices and things started coming back to where they were making money again. So it was a little late to try that, but that's what they were doing.
Um,
And that's part of that business of the machine guns too. Out in Western Iowa, they were doing that going into Sioux City. And one of the proteges of Grant Wood painted a painting that depicted that. And I found it down in Davenport at the museum down there. And they were trying to promote it as a farmer's market, that things would get a little rough and rowdy. And you could tell by the highway sign there that what she was depicting was one of these milk dumping incidents, where they turn people's trucks around that had milk on them and either send them home or they dump it right there on the spot if they were insisting on breaking breaking through the roadblock. And so there was a guy, she had painted a guy laying there on the ground, spread out, spread eagle, where he got knocked out. And so they were trying to sell it as a farmer's market where things were getting a little rough and reckless. And I went to him, I said, like, are you crazy? I says, that doesn't do justice to this photograph or this painting at all. I says, that's not what this depicts. And I don't know whether they ever changed that, but I kept at it for 3 days before I quit, trying to get them to make sure that they did change it. I called them and I sent them emails, and I went and talked to them while I was at the museum twice. So I don't know whether they changed it or not, but yeah, you're right. They did do that. And the NFO did that too later on. Some things just never stop. They keep coming back and they try it again and try it again. It's kind of like protest movements. They keep trying to do the same thing and expect different results. Well, eventually you get to the point where that doesn't work anymore. You need to try something different. And that's what
I
happened.
think even in the 1980s, they had some stuff going on farms as a reaction to some Reagan's policies or somebody or other.
I see that. Thank you, Carla. Iowa State Extension officially came into being in April 1906 by state legislative action. So there you go, 1906, Grant Wood would have been 15.
How about that?
So, but he
Hey.
was living in the city then, so.
Hey, on that point, Steve, could you unpack a little bit of this? You talked about the arms race with farming machinery and tractors getting bigger. And, you know, Iowa State Extension is becoming a thing, and U.S. Agriculture Secretary Henry Wallace is a friend of Grant Wood's. And I think if you fast forward today and you tell farmers that, hey, Pioneer, Wallace, that whole thing, they won't let you grow your own seeds anymore. I mean, obviously that's a travesty thinking about how the way things used to work. But I'm curious about that moment in time when farmers were excited about the technology. They didn't know where it was going to go, but there was this moment of like excitement, and hybrid corn was a new thing thanks to Wallace and his fledgling company. But it quickly became a bad thing, and the commodification, it's crazy now, as we all know. But talk about that beginning moment when they were trying to figure it out, because obviously, as you mentioned, Grant Wood didn't depict that stuff. It was starting to happen then, but he wanted to go back 20 years before, right?
Yeah. Well, Wallace has a lot of problems. Wallace is also a socialist. You know, he truly was a Roosevelt socialist. And when it got down to Truman or Wallace, it didn't take long before Wallace was gone. And I think that there was a lot to be said about that. There was a lot of things that were happening that would have worked out well for the farmers, but you're getting into the place where we have a cheap food policy in the United States. Everything has to be cheap food. We got to have cheap food. And the only reason that the way the farm policy works today is that the farmers can't make any money producing what they're producing to be used for what it was supposed to be used for. Hybrid corn was hybrided for feed for cattle and hogs. It's got a lot of starch in it. The old corn, the old seed corn that was, you picked your own seed from your own corn, that was still food quality corn. You could still make cornmeal out of that. You couldn't do that today. It'd be like trying to take ear corn out of the field and try to eat it like sweet corn. In the old days, you could do that. If you got it before it started to turn, you could use that corn as sweet corn. Not anymore. And consequently, that's the reason why all this business of 52% of Iowa's corn is being turned into alcohol. It's not because we necessarily need the alcohol, because it takes more energy to produce the alcohol than what the alcohol would produce in terms of BTUs. And not to mention that, only that, but it takes fresh water, and lots of it, to produce alcohol, and which creates lots of steam, which is the greenhouse gas. So you can talk about it all you like as far as being something that's good for the ecology, but in the long run, it's not. So if we made corn food instead of corn as food for cattle and hogs, maybe we wouldn't have such a problem. We could find a way to market the corn for something that could be used for food rather than for oil or feed for cattle. And, you know, so
Well-
if you can't sell the corn, then what are you going to do with it? Well, you got to turn it into alcohol. We got to do it. We got to do it. And then
Well,
the government gets involved with it.
Well, then
Go
we
ahead.
circle back to the 70s again, Steve, right? And our buddy Earl Butz, enter the deregulation of the corn markets, enter corn sweeteners. So there was a glut of
Yeah.
corn on the market, and it needed a place to go. And so it went into, now you can't, about anything that's processed has corn syrup in it, which is connected to, some would say, the rise in some health problems, diabetes and, you know, all that sort of thing, because it just spikes your glucose so much. So, yeah, these are big things to grapple with and understand for sure.
Yeah, I mean, with those two issues, it sounds like we're moving backwards in terms of food quality and in terms of economic prowess. I mean, maybe we need to get back to the 1900s and actually grow food that people can consume that won't be bad for our health. That's
Well,
another issue, I guess.
Well, enter the local foods market, which is, to your point, Mike, there
Uh-huh.
is a really big, eat local, sustainably, farm to table stuff. But I
Yes.
mean, boy, it's Lynn, you might know better how close we might be to even being able to achieve something like that actually allows people to live on their land sustainably and market locally. I think a lot of people are working on it,
That's good.
It's a good trend. It's a good trend.
Mhm.
And we have a neighbor who has a CSA. He has a small vegetable farm. And yeah, he's doing well. I think he's doing good work too.
There's
Well,
also,
yeah.
there's also a trend for more gardening, not necessarily, I mean, in the rural areas, but also in the city, where the schools and the churches are setting lots aside and providing guidance for kids and adults to garden so that they can eat the fresh produce.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's complex, the farm economy. They're complex issues, but it's good to talk about it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think in northeastern Iowa, there was something on public television recently about a young man who started farming mushrooms for restaurant use, and it just, that market just
So
took
you're
off.
saying it
for him.
mushroomed then? Mhm.
What's that?
It mushroomed?
But it correct. It mushroomed. The mushroom market mushroomed for
Sorry
him.
about that.
Yes. And so anyway, but that's highly nichey, and that I mean, the bulk of Iowa is still in what the corn, soybeans, cattle,
Monoculture, crop monoculture, I
yeah,
think they call that.
yeah. So while you're thinking about anything else you'd like to say about rural life, would you like to hear one of your limericks?
Can
that
I
you-
ask a question real quick though? Just
Heck
from a-
yeah.
yeah,
Sure.
farming technical question, because I remembered, so my great grandfather, in his obituary, it said breaking prairie sod at the outbreak of the war. This is the Civil War, mind you. Mr. Nash was breaking prairie sod for the Amana colony using a 36-inch plow and 6 yokes of oxen. So is breaking prairie sod just kind of like out in the field and preparing the area for farmland? Is that what that means? Breaking prairie sod?
Prairie sod is prairie grass. And prairie grass has roots that go down 16 feet. And they're tough. There's one prairie plant that they called rupture root. You get your plow hung up on that doggone thing, and it would just hold you back, and then eventually it would break. And it was that tough. It took probably about 3 years after you plowed the first time in prairie before you got a decent crop, because it was so full of ruts and so full of just junk, hardly any soil there. And most of the soil was sandy because the prairie grasses would bring up sand too. And it took a while before you would settle down and actually be worth farming it. The original pioneers would use an axe and literally cut with the axe into the sod and then plant. They didn't even bother with trying to plow it. They just took an axe and chopped into it and stuck some corn in it and hoped it would grow. And that's how tough it was. And a 36-inch plow, I don't know how, that's amazing. If you could get even that many oxen to pull a
Yeah, it says
36-inch.
36-inch plow and 6 yokes of oxen.
Oh my God. That's a big plow. That's a big plow.
36 inches, yeah.
And I don't know how deep that was going either.
Yeah, I don't know.
Would 6
They-
yokes
they-
be 12 oxen? 6
Yeah.
yokes, 2 oxen per yoke, 12, 12.
Oh, wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't think they might have been 36 inches long, but I don't think they were that wide. I think they were probably 8 inches at best. And probably didn't go down more than 4 inches. Even with that many oxen on, because that stuff was really tough.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Woo. Yeah, there's some really neat historical documents, or interesting anyway, that I just picked up one, something that had sod houses in the title about the literal breaking up of the prairie and got into what, log cabin life was like, from primary sources and stuff. Boy, yeah, it's quite something when you really try to put yourself in their place, So.
Well, if you got onto the prairie in the fall and you were on prairie and you were a long ways from logs, you didn't have much to build with. So you just dig a hole in the ground, literally, and pile the sod up around the outside edges and put a roof on it. That was your house. That was a soddy. And if you continued with it and just made it bigger, you had a comfortable house, but you're living in a hole in the ground. It's basically what it is.
Yeah. So, and sometime maybe, I've got some really interesting, like things from 1878 that are like the Lynn County History Journal or whatever it is. Just the way they describe things is really it's interesting, and it's a little bit entertaining too. It's just I mean, and it really does speak to a wildly different time. So I'm going to write myself a note there, maybe to read an excerpt or two of that, or share that somehow with you from there in Lynn County, because you can't make this stuff up.
North of Central City, there was a place called Sodtown. So it was actually a town that was all sod houses.
How about that?
There is still a sod house in Long Grove, Iowa. The sod is now inside the walls as insulation, but there's a history group that supports that.
Oh,
If
cool.
anybody's interested in looking up Long Grove and sod houses.
Oh, that's really neat.
Interesting.
That's very interesting. Oh my gosh. Well, what do we got going here? Anything in the chat? Okay. Well, we've got plenty of time. Okay, I put together 3 limericks from what you all put in the chat. I added a few words here and there just for something, but Sylvia, did you have your hand up? What was going?
I did. Well, first I wanted to thank Steve, because that was just amazing. And I really appreciate your scholarship and research on that, even though right now I'm terribly depressed after considering all of the things that need to be fixed in this world. But I really, I'm the oldest grandchild, so I have enough memories of hearing my grandparents talk, my parents talk, all of those things. I remember staying at my great aunt down in Lucas County with no electricity and the lanterns at night and things like that, and helping collect eggs. So, all of this kind of just, it relates to me, but not on the level of actually having lived it. But that being said, I actually wrote a limerick. Let me get this in here, Elaine, and then you do your, okay? Just trying to get a little humor or something. There once was an artist named Wood, whose paintings reflected the hood of Iowa's land. Homeboy took a stand to paint what he knew. It was grand. Or you could say it was, or no, it can't be grand. It should be, homeboy took a stand to paint what he knew. Ah, shoot. That last word didn't work. It should, where does it rhyme? It rhymes.
The lines 1 and 2 and 5, and then rhyme together, and then 3 and 4 rhyme with each other.
Okay, I will have to find a different word than grand.
Da-da-da-da-da-da.
I can do that. Okay, thank you.
You'll get it probably by the time I'm reading what people wrote. You'll have it. So here's what you guys came up with.
Okay.
Grant was a man from Stone City. His impressionist paintings were pretty. So let's paint now with words, a poem about birds. But first, wasn't that pitchfork painting most pithy? So that's one. You know, we're trying to shoehorn some of these into each other. So we'll see what this next one does. Grant Wood milked cows with a bucket. Here we go. One could say he absolutely loved it because, as he famously remarked, that's where his best ideas were sparked. He would never say, take this job and shove it. I don't know. That rhyme was a little bit
Close,
but you know, we could always draft. Okay, and the last one is Grant Wood spent a lot of his life in the city, where some said his only wife was a bit of a biddy. Yes, he painted hills and roads to guff from some in university clothes. Who cares? Few folk were nearly as witty. So there you go.
Good one.
We could, you know, we could tweak those, but there's gonna be some limericks in the Chronicle this year. Let's keep them coming. So that, yeah. Anyway, there can't be enough humor in the world. Oh my gosh, we have a furry friend with us as well.
Oh.
Thanks for bringing your companion, Terry. Who do we have, Terry?
This is Copper, and I see Debbie has her Shih Tzu
okay.
too.
Oh,
I had something more. Hi, Debbie.
oh, there we go. There we go.
Oh,
From afar. Hi, Debbie.
And now, no one says that we can hang out until people feel like talking. We could pull a Quaker thing. We could sit in silence for a little while, see what people have to say, and see what the spirit says. And
Without my dog, I do have a city girl question, if I may.
of course, go.
So in Steve's PowerPoint, which I loved, by the way, your third slide, I believe, was of fall plowing that is owned by John Deere Company, oddly enough, if I recall. And then that painting was followed by a image of a plow and a plowman with these straps around his head and a
Great.
similar plow. Was that the same plow that Grant Wood depicted in Fall Plowing, or is it different? Or I just wonder how it works and how beautiful of a painting, just if I may go Grant Wood for a moment, how beautiful of a painting it is that Grant Wood didn't depict the plowman or the horse or the mule. He just dropped the reins and brought it to the forefront as if the plow is the hero. Anyway, if you could comment on that, I'd really appreciate it.
Oh. I guess everybody had their own way of plowing when it came to horses. I'm not much for plowing with horses. I didn't have anything to do with that sort of thing. I was around horse equipment, but for haying and for bundles, thrashing and stuff like that, but that's about it, and very little of it at that. As far as the horses are concerned, the number of horses was just a matter of how much more power you needed to have. When you start off with tractors, you end up with about, you know, when I was growing up, if you had a 40 horse tractor, you had a pretty decent tractor. You know, and a horse would wear out easy enough. That's the reason why these old farms are in the middle of their farms. They're not on the edge of their farm, they're in the middle of the farm because it takes time and energy for a horse to get to a field. So if you put your barn in the middle of the farm, then you've got shorter distances to go to the field just to save energy on the horse. How the business of reins, I have no idea. I have no clue. But I could probably find somebody that could tell you, but I not right off the hand. Do I know?
Well,
I will say one thing about those pictures. If you look at Stone City and you see that those little corn on the right there on the foot of the painting, and you look across the river on the other side of Stone City and you see shocks, that don't happen. You don't have shocks and corn 6 inches high at the same time. It doesn't happen. So I don't know whether he was just jerking people around or what the heck he was doing, but that's a case of a little bit of odd stuff going on there. So who knows?
Oh, he was taking liberties. One of my favorite things to say. He was taking liberties.
Yes, artistic license.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah.
I have a question too about the paintings that you listed, Steve. There was one that showed green fields with plowed squares. What is that from? I don't know that I ever remember seeing that image.
That's a Grant Wood. That's a spring plowing.
Oh, it is. It's just a piece of it?
No, it's, you know, it's a pretty good sized painting, but that's spring plowing, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. I need to go do some backtracking and see what I
And if
have
you look right down at the bottom, there's a horse and a plow.
Yeah,
you know,
teeny
it's really
tiny.
small.
Very tiny.
Thanks.
I like what you said, Terry, about the plow being the hero, because clearly that was the land and the plow were the focal point, and the color, time of year, you know, it's just, anyway, it really is a beautiful painting. And Stone City as an idealized, magical little community in that painting, I mean, that really is something else. It makes me think of his, like when he was 14 years old or whatever, and going to doing his imagination aisles, or when he was teaching. No, it was when he was with Marvin Cohn when he was young, and they were doing kind of theatrical type stuff, and you know, just kind of going off on their imaginary tangents, and you know, trying this and that. Your hand's still up, Sylvia. Do you have something else going? No? Oh, okay. All right. Don't be shy.
Well, and if I might throw in a little bit about John Deere here, there was just a recent court case where they ruled that John Deere had to modify their tractors to allow the farmers to work on the tractors, because the farmers were complaining they couldn't even work on the tractors anymore. They were so high tech, and John Deere held the information or something like that. So there was just a big settlement where John Deere has to make all this information available to the farmers so they can repair their own tractors again. That was just in the news not too long ago. Did anybody hear about that? Or
I
The
didn't,
only thing-
but nothing surprises me.
yeah, but
The
that
only
was
thing I know about John Deere tractors has to do with their combines and their GPS systems. They're getting them ripped off, and it's like $20,000 for the replacement of a GPS system. So
yeah.
I don't know how they're going to work on those. Somebody's gonna
Well,
have to
I
do-
doubt that they work on the GPS. I'm thinking more the mechanicals, you know,
Yeah.
some of the mechanical stuff even. I had heard that the farmers couldn't do anything at all to the tractors, but now that Deere is either making some manuals available, or so at least they can do some work on the mechanical portion of it. But I don't know the details. I just saw the news, so.
Yeah.
Hey,
But,
Well,
you
wait,
know, a
parts
new
are a big
combine
thing
is
too.
$1 million now, so. anyway.
You got some thoughts, Wayne?
Well, to Mike's point, the mechanical things are an issue, but also John Deere's maintained it, has argued that its software is proprietary. And that if they give the software out to farmers, the farmers will wreck their own tractors. I mean, that's oversimplifying it, but that's an argument that John Deere's made. But it's true that they were just the losers. I don't know at what level of where that decision happened, but Mike's right.
Thank you.
And there's one thing we haven't talked about, and that's the manure and the runoff and the water quality.
I was thinking about that with I know there's been a lot of attention paid to buffer strips. You know, that is a very active endeavor, but it just hasn't permeated everywhere because of course a lot of things can't be mandated. You know, nobody wants to
It's a voluntary,
you know,
everything is voluntary.
well, when it
And
comes
the
to
vol-
these sorts of things, yeah.
The improvements that these voluntary efforts have accomplished amount to 0.01%. That's it. 0.01%. Now, just recently, there was a cattle operation out in Western Iowa. A guy owns 2 cattle lots of 40,000 cattle in each lot. And he catches the runoff from those cattle lots in an earth berm. And they had a lot of rain. And consequently, the ground is soaked. The field that's next to the cattle operation where they usually pump off the urine and what have you that runs out of the cattle lot, they just basically pump it from there into the field next to this operation. The water had already waterlogged the field. And then all the water comes out through the lot and down into this berm, and it's full. So they have to pump out the berm, and so they did, onto a field that was already saturated. And consequently, the manure ran straight into the creek. Didn't even stop for go. It just went straight into the creek. And then they decided, oh, we got to report this, because if you don't report it, you get fined worse. The fine for that was $2,000. That was it. The fine for a guy that was burying and burning carpentry waste and plastics and stuff like that. I can't remember exactly where it was. He was a builder, and he just had a field, and he dug a pit, burned this stuff. His was $10,000. Now, if you can make sense of that, I'd eat my hat. But the DNR is the one that's in charge of all that.
Okay. Yeah,
Oh, story upon story upon story. And we know that, you know, I read a study not too long ago about, it was a comparison of hog farming, the old fashioned way with the huts that required a little more land, and then confinement farming. And they were comparing some things on it in terms of environmental impacts and all that stuff. And of course, it takes more land to do it the old fashioned way. So that's where the difference came when the money became the issue, you know? So when they wanted to scale up, it's not the way they wanted it to come down. But for a family farmer, if that's, I don't know, you know, it's some of these dynamics are beyond me, and I don't want to make generalizations that I don't know anything about. All I
It
know
just seems
is
to be, money seems to be behind a lot of the decisions all throughout the years. So they went after larger amounts of money, and then it had bad effects on the environment. So now they're having to back off and say, well, maybe we can find a different way and still make some money, but protect the environment and the food supply too. it's not easy. It's like you say, it's very complex, but I don't know the answer. Just something else.
Well, some of it, I think they're dialing it back to the more you can do, like garden where you're at, farm small where you're at, increase independence, but the horse is out of the gate on the large operations and the huge impacts. So I don't know.
And then there's these giant chicken operations where if one chicken gets the bird flu, they go out and they kill 1 million chickens and everything. I sit there and I read that in the paper and I wonder, can't they just segment some of the chickens or something? But no, I guess they can't. They got to kill a whole huge mass of chickens to prevent the spread of this bird flu. And I don't know. I mean,
it spreads by wild birds too.
oh,
So
okay.
sparrows
Well,
can
then, well,
sparrows
you can't
can
very
spread-
well kill
No.
all the wild birds either. So I don't know.
Well, there's always been disease to deal with. I mean, has anybody been watching the new all creatures great and small? They're dealing with tuberculosis during World War II, run up to World War II, you know, so that's in the era, you know, so farmers
Oh,
are
yeah.
panicking, you know, getting their animals tested and slaughtered.
Oh,
as
yeah.
needed.
I imagine the first antibiotics when they came to the farms, they must have seemed like a miracle drug. That for a while they seemed like a miracle drug. That
They always do
miracle
for a
was-
while.
you know. Oh well.
Has anybody heard about the river that's gone dry in Iowa? There's 5 miles of a river in central Iowa that's gone dry because,
What?
yeah,
Not the Skunk
they-
River.
no,
Okay.
it's an odd name. I can't tell you. Anyway, the problem is that they have a water district in Minnesota, and they're pumping waters out of the aquifer, and they've dropped the
Uh-oh.
water enough that 5 miles of this river is now a sand trail. There's no water in it.
It's not the Wapsipinicon, is it?
No,
It's,
Okay.
I just pulled it up. It says it's the
Oshedon or something like that.
Oshedon. Oh, yeah. I don't know how you say it. Oshedon. Yeah.
Oshedon.
60 miles from Ocheda Lake, in far southern Minnesota to Spencer in
Hmm.
Iowa, where it joins the Little Sioux. It has run dry at least 4 times since 2015, this says.
Elaine, may I?
Yeah, go for it. Wayne.
To your point, and also the point that Steve mentioned about the manure issue, in the period that's listed as tonight's chat, look, 1890 to 1940, how was fertilizer done, if at all, other than just the natural byproduct of manure put onto the fields? Was there any other sort of commercial fertilizer? Because my understanding is that commercial fertilizer took off nitrogen, nitrates, ammonia, anhydrous after World War II as a way to market things that had been developed for explosives during the war, Second War. But commercially, was there a fertilizer industry in Iowa from 1890 to 1940? Or was it just load the manure and haul it to the fields? Does anybody know?
Manure would probably be about it. Manure and limestone to sweeten the fields. You get too acidic after a while. But aside from that, that was it.
Some farmers also use gypsum to do the same
Yeah.
as the lime to loosen the soil, depending on what was available.
Thank you.
Oh my good. Yeah. Well,
Interesting.
yeah. Any more thoughts? What do we?
Well, I'll have to grow a home garden this year.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Do your planks and push-ups and all this stuff. Gardening could be hard work. Oh my gosh. Gotta take it easy. I'm just speaking from experience. I get
Yeah, exactly.
I just get overzealous. But anyway, and speaking of that, I don't know if anybody knows Ed Fallon and his wife Kathy.
Yep.
Yes, I've heard of
Yeah,
it.
Ed. Well, they have an urban garden in the Sherman Hill neighborhood of Des Moines.
Oh,
And they
neat.
actually give workshops. It's a spectacular in-town city, legitimate city garden. They have chickens,
Okay.
they have bees, and the whole place is
Wow.
raised beds. And they do workshops and tours and just teach and consult with communities and
Mhm.
organizations on that. It's called Urban Birds
Urban
and Bees.
gardens.
Urban Birds and Bees. Yeah,
That's good to know. Mhm.
yeah, it's a really neat thing.
Yeah.
Hey, hello.
Mhm.
Yes. Well, welcome. Child of Terry's. Indeed. Oh. Well, it
Okay.
is 7:53,
Okay.
and unless we've made use of our time, we've
Mhm.
allowed ourselves a leisurely jaunt through the rural landscape, as it were. And the landscape, has changed. I mean, Stone City's changed. Look how much it's been quarried since Stone City was painted.
You don't even see
Come a
all
long
that that's
way.
quarried.
Mhm.
Though it still has an essence about
It's
it.
underground now. They're underground.
So good.
So I am tempted to say, well, I think we've run out. We've
Yeah, I
kind of
think
come to
so.
the end of our road. And sure enjoyed hearing your voices and your thoughts. And I know there'll be more coming in the weeks to come. When Paul Jewell and Barbara Feller and Dorothy Bunny Montgomery and then Joe Nick Coffee next week. Sylvia will be presenting new other aspects of Grant Wood country and the culture and life and times of Grant Wood. It's just going to keep coming. So I think I'll sign off and thank you all. And
Okay.
pleasure to
Thank
see
you, everybody.
Pleasure to see everyone. Take care. Have a good week.